You were already thinking about leaving before you walked in. Not because you didn't want to be there, not because something went wrong, not because you don't like people. You just knew. Before the night started, you already felt the ceiling, already calculated how long it would take before the energy started costing more than it was giving back. So you go, usually early, usually without much explanation, and you almost never feel bad about it. You know the moment. It hits around the 90-minute mark, sometimes sooner. The room gets louder. The conversations start repeating. Someone is laughing a little too hard at something that wasn't that funny. The small talk circles back to something it already covered, and you feel it, a quiet internal signal, like a gauge ticking past a line. Nothing dramatic. You don't get angry or restless or anxious. You just know you're done. So you find the host, you say something brief. You mean it when you say it was good to see them. And then you leave. You're in the car before half the guests have finished their first drink. The drive home is quiet. You don't feel like you missed out on anything. You feel like you got out at the right time. That is not antisocial behavior. That is not rudeness dressed up in psychology. That is a specific kind of self-awareness that took years to develop. You didn't always know how to do that. For a long time, you stayed longer than you wanted to. You endured the last hour of a party because it was expected, because leaving felt impolite, because you didn't want to be the guy who left early. At some point, that changed. You don't stay in conversations you've already finished. Someone is still talking, still circling, still processing out loud, and you checked out 2 minutes ago. You're nodding. You're present enough. But the actual engagement ended. You know when a conversation has said everything it has to say. And after that point, the staying isn't connection. It's performance. You stopped performing years ago. Not all at once. It wasn't a decision you made on a specific night. It happened gradually, across a lot of rooms where you stayed too long and left wishing you hadn't, where you said yes to the second round and regretted it, where you kept the conversation going because silence felt impolite, even though you had nothing left to add. At some point, you stopped treating your own limits like they were the problem. You don't fill silence just to fill it. Other people get uncomfortable when the conversation stops. They reach for something, anything, just to keep the air from going quiet. You've noticed this. You've watched people introduce a topic they have no interest in just to avoid a pause. You don't do that anymore. When you have something to say, you say it. When you don't, you don't. The silence doesn't bother you. It never really did. But at some point, you noticed other people needed you to act like it bothered you. And for a while, you played along. You kept the conversation running for them. You mostly stopped doing that, too. You leave gatherings early. You leave conversations when they're done. You leave situations when they've expired. You don't stay in rooms that no longer fit. You don't maintain relationships that have become purely obligatory. You don't extend a visit just because extending it is what a person is supposed to do. And you've heard the read on this. Antisocial. Cold. Hard to get close to. Doesn't let people in. Doesn't make an effort. None of that lands the way it used to. Not because you don't care what people think, because you've watched those same people stay in rooms they hated for years. Stay in relationships that had been over for a long time. Stay in conversations that were draining them. Just because leaving felt like a statement. You don't see that as more connected. You see it as less honest. You are selective with your presence. Not selective like you're building a personal brand. Selective the way a man gets when he has finally stopped lying to himself about what costs him and what doesn't. Energy is finite. You know this in a way that most people haven't actually reckoned with yet. It's not that you have less of it than other people. You might have more. But you've become very precise about where it goes. Who gets it? Which rooms deserve it? Which conversations earn it? Most don't. That's not cynicism. That's calibration. You've done the math, you've sat in the rooms, you've had the conversations, you've given the hours. And somewhere in the accounting, you figured out which of those things was actually returning something and which was just quietly spending you down. The early exit is part of that accounting. There's a specific kind of man who leaves before he's depleted, who reads the room not to play it, but to know when it's done giving, who shows up fully, engages genuinely, and then gets out before the quality drops. You don't stay for the performance of staying. You don't measure the success of a night by how late you were there. Some of the best nights you've had ended at 9. Some of the worst went until 2 in the morning. You've stopped confusing duration with depth. This is where it gets more specific. The behavior is real. The pattern is consistent. But what's driving it isn't just preference. It isn't personality quirk. It isn't introversion in the casual way people use that word. What's driving it is a shift in how your nervous system processes social input. Men in this stage of life, 40s, 50s, sometimes earlier, depending on the man, start experiencing something that doesn't have a clean cultural name yet. The processing speed changes, not cognitively, energetically. The threshold for meaningful versus draining interaction gets narrower, smaller, more precise. Early in life, novelty carries you. New people, new conversations, new environments. The newness itself keeps you engaged. You can stay in a mediocre room for 3 hours and walk away feeling okay because something was new, something was stimulating. The input itself had value just by being fresh. That stops working at some point. The brain has seen enough rooms, enough conversations, enough social patterns. The novelty doesn't carry the same weight. So the bar for what actually sustains engagement rises, and the room that used to feel fine now feels thin. The conversation that used to feel interesting now feels recycled. The event that used to feel worth attending now feels like something you're managing. This is not decline. This is recalibration. Your system is filtering more precisely because it has more reference points. You've been to enough parties, had enough conversations, sat in enough circles to know what actually matters and what doesn't. That knowledge doesn't make you harder to engage. It makes you harder to fool. There's a psychological concept called identity consolidation. It's not something most people talk about outside of developmental research, but it describes something you probably recognize. Early in life, identity is partly assembled from the outside in. You figure out who you are partly by what rooms you survive, what groups accept you, what performances land. You stay in rooms partly to confirm that you belong, that you're okay, that you're reading the situation right. That drive fades as identity becomes more internally anchored. A man who knows who he is doesn't need the room to tell him, doesn't need to stay until the end to prove something, doesn't need the external confirmation that he was present enough, engaged enough, social enough. He already knows. So the staying stops being necessary. The early exit isn't withdrawal, it's the behavior of a man who doesn't need the room to validate the night. You have also at some point stopped performing interest you don't feel. This is a bigger shift than it sounds. Most social behavior is held together by a layer of performed interest. People pretend to find things more engaging than they do. Pretend conversations are more meaningful than they are. Pretend they want to stay when they want to leave. The social contract runs partly on this. And for years, you ran on it too. At some point, you started paying attention to the cost. Every minute of performed interest is a withdrawal. Small ones, but they accumulate. And the men who are most precise about their exits are often the men who got tired of the accumulated cost of performing what they didn't actually feel. Leaving early is honest, is the behavior of a man who decided his time was as real as anyone else's in the room. There's a version of this that can harden. A man who leaves early in every situation, including ones that actually deserved his presence. A man whose filter got so tight that nothing gets through. Who mistakes distance for discernment, isolation for efficiency. That's worth being honest about. The question is not whether you leave, it's whether you can stay when something actually earns it, whether you're capable of presence when the room deserves it, whether the early exit is a read or a reflex. Most of the men watching this can answer that. They know the difference. They've stayed for the things that mattered. They've given the full presence when it was worth it. The exits that look cold are usually cold only to people who never understood what you were doing in the first place. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from years of staying too long. Not physical, social. The kind that builds up over a lifetime of extending conversations past their end, attending events out of obligation, performing interest you didn't feel. Staying in rooms because leaving felt like a statement. A man who leaves early has usually lived through that exhaustion, has felt what it costs to stay past the point of genuine engagement, and at some point, quietly, without announcement, stopped doing it. Not because he stopped caring about people, because he started being honest about what caring actually looks like. Not performed presence, not obligatory endurance, actual engagement for as long as it's real, and then a clean exit when it isn't. You don't explain the early departure much anymore. You used to. Used to feel the pull to justify it, soften it, make sure no one read it wrong, give a reason that sounded better than the real one. Now you mostly just go. And the people who know you well enough don't need the explanation. They've already figured out that your presence while you're there is complete, that when you're in the room, you're actually in the room, that you're not performing attention or managing impressions or half engaged. You're there until you're not. And when you leave, you're actually gone, not checking in, not second guessing. Done. That's not a flaw in how you relate to people. That's a different standard for what relating actually means. Most people never get there. They stay too long in too many rooms for too many years. They confuse presence with connection, duration with depth. They mistake the man who leaves early for the man who doesn't care. They don't understand that the man who leaves at the right time is the same man who shows up completely when it matters. You stop needing them to understand. That's the psychology, that's the pattern. And for a man who has spent decades learning what his presence is worth, it isn't complicated. You leave early because you finally know what late costs.